The human's dire situation. Ethan stumbled through the alien forest, every step heavier than the last. The air was thick with the smell of damp moss, and the strange purple trees loomed high above him, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows under the twin moons. He clutched his side, pain shooting through his ribs where his crash harness had dug in during the impact. His ship was a smoldering wreck miles behind him, and his supplies were either destroyed or lost. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but thirst was the real enemy. His throat felt like sandpaper, and his vision blurred as dehydration took its toll. He had hoped to find water, food, anything, but this alien planet seemed determined to break him. The glowing plants he had passed earlier had oozed a strange green sap that smelled of chemicals, and the small creatures scuttling between the trees had eyes that glowed like embers, watching him with unsettling curiosity. Ethan felt like prey. He glanced over his shoulder every few minutes, certain something was stalking him. Then he heard it, a low growl, barely audible over the rustle of the alien foliage. His heart raced. He picked up his pace, his boots crunching on the oddly textured ground that felt like rubber. Whatever was out there, he couldn't afford to stick around and find out. He stumbled, catching himself on one of the glowing tree trunks. The bark was warm to the touch, and it pulsed faintly, as if alive. Ethan shuddered and pushed himself forward. Ahead, he saw a shimmering lake, its surface reflecting the pale blue light of the larger moon. Relief surged through him. Water. He could make it. He stumbled toward the lake, his legs trembling with exhaustion. But as he neared the edge, his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the soft, mossy ground. Ethan gasped for air, his face pressed against the alien moss. It smelled oddly sweet, like honey and citrus, but he was too weak to care. His eyelids drooped, and the world around him began to blur. He was too far gone to notice the soft footsteps approaching or the shadow that fell over him. When he opened his eyes again, he wasn't alone. Standing over him was a tall, silver-skinned figure. Her features were sharp yet graceful, her large black eyes reflecting the moonlight. She wore a flowing metallic garment that shimmered as she moved. In her hands was a device that hummed softly, emitting a faint blue light. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat was too dry to form words. The alien woman crouched beside him, her expression calm yet focused. She spoke in a melodic language he couldn't understand, but her tone was soothing. She reached out, and Ethan flinched, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his body refused to obey. The woman tilted her head, her expression softening. She pressed a small button on her device, and a holographic screen appeared, displaying symbols Ethan didn't recognize. She studied the screen before nodding to herself. Then she spoke again, her words still incomprehensible but filled with quiet authority. "Close your eyes," she said in halting English, her voice accented but clear. "I will help." Ethan hesitated. He didn't trust her. How could he? But what choice did he have? He was dying, and she was his only hope. Slowly, he closed his eyes, the world around him fading into darkness. The alien nurse, he guessed that's what she was, placed the humming device near his chest. He felt a faint warmth spread through him, easing the pain in his ribs. Then she pressed a small, glowing vial to his lips. He resisted at first, but she gently tilted his head back, and the liquid trickled into his mouth. It tasted strange, like mint and something metallic, but as it slid down his throat, a cool sensation replaced the burning dryness. Almost immediately, he felt a surge of energy. His vision cleared, and the pounding in his head subsided. The pain in his ribs dulled to a faint ache. Ethan opened his eyes and stared at her, amazed. "Who are you?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she pressed a glowing patch to his arm, and a cool sensation spread through his veins. She stood and gestured for him to follow. Ethan tried to rise, but his legs wobbled beneath him. "Rest," she said, her voice firm yet kind. "Danger comes Danger. The word sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He looked around, suddenly aware of the stillness in the air. The growls he had heard earlier now seemed closer, their echoes bouncing through the forest. "Wait," he rasped, but the woman was already moving, her graceful steps barely making a sound on the mossy ground. She turned back and held out her hand, her expression urging him to trust her. Ethan hesitated, but then the growls grew louder, and he knew he had no choice. He reached for her hand, her silver skin cool against his own. Together, they disappeared into the shadows of the alien forest, leaving the shimmering lake and its unseen predators behind. Unfamiliar care. Ethan's eyelids fluttered open to a soft glow, not from the twin moons he'd seen earlier, but from an ethereal light that seemed to pulse with life. His head rested on something unusually soft, almost like clouds, yet firm enough to support his aching body. The air smelled faintly sweet, like flowers blooming in a spring meadow. It took a moment for him to realize he was no longer outside in the forest. The room around him was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were translucent, shimmering like liquid silver, yet they were solid. Strange symbols moved across the surfaces, rearranging themselves as though alive. There was no visible furniture, but the room felt far from empty. Hovering orbs of light floated overhead, casting a warm glow that seemed to hum softly. Ethan's eyes flicked to his arm, where a thin, glowing patch pulsed faintly against his skin. The pain in his ribs was gone, replaced by a strange, tingling warmth. "You are awake," a melodic voice said, startling him. Ethan jerked upright, only to find the silver-skinned alien woman standing at the far side of the room. Her large black eyes studied him with an intensity that made him feel both exposed and oddly reassured. In her hand, she held a small, glowing vial filled with a liquid that seemed to swirl and shimmer as though alive. "Where am I?" he croaked, his voice still weak but clearer than before. The alien woman tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Safe," she replied in halting English, her voice calm yet deliberate. "You needed help." Ethan's mind raced. Memories of the forest, the shimmering lake, and the eerie growls came rushing back. He remembered collapsing. And then, she had been there. He glanced at the patch on his arm, then back at her. "You saved me." The woman nodded, stepping closer. Her movements were fluid, almost hypnotic, like water flowing over smooth stones. She held out the vial, gesturing for him to take it. "Drink," she said simply. Ethan eyed the vial suspiciously. The liquid inside seemed to glow brighter as it neared him, casting faint reflections on his hand. "What is it?" he asked. "Milk," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Restore life. You trust," or she didn't finish, but her meaning was clear. Either he drank it, or he risked whatever fate had awaited him in the forest. He hesitated, his survival instincts warring with his distrust. But the way she looked at him, steady, unflinching, and almost hopeful, made him pause. Finally, he raised the vial to his lips and drank. The liquid was unlike anything he had ever tasted. It was cool and refreshing, with a faint sweetness that spread through his body like a wave of calm. As it slid down his throat, he felt his strength returning, his senses sharpening. For the first time in hours, or perhaps days, his mind felt clear. "What is this stuff?" Ethan asked, his voice stronger now. The woman knelt beside him, her eyes scanning him with a mix of curiosity and relief. "It heals," she said simply. "Not for humans. Risky. But you, strong." She paused, then added, "Your kind. Different. Different." Ethan wanted to press her, but before he could, she turned away and activated a small device on her wrist. A holographic screen appeared, filled with symbols he couldn't read. The symbols rearranged themselves rapidly, and her brow furrowed in concentration as she studied the display. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan asked after a moment, his voice steady now. The woman didn't look at him immediately. Instead, she tapped a few more symbols on her device before finally meeting his gaze. "You are alone," she said simply, as though that explained everything. "No one should die alone." Her words hit him harder than he expected. There was no pity in her voice, no condescension, just a quiet, undeniable truth. Ethan didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Suddenly, the room's soft hum changed, growing sharper and more insistent. The woman's head snapped toward the far wall, where a red symbol began to pulse. Ethan didn't understand the meaning, but he recognized the urgency in her expression. "What's going on?" he asked, his pulse quickening. She stood abruptly, her movements swift and precise. "Danger," she said, her voice clipped. "They come." "Who? What's coming?" Ethan demanded, struggling to his feet. The woman grabbed a small device from the wall. It looked like a weapon, though its sleek design was unlike any firearm he'd ever seen. She glanced at him, her expression grim. "Predators," she said. "They hunt weakness." Ethan's blood ran cold. He remembered the growls in the forest, the feeling of being watched. "How did they find us?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. The woman gestured to the patch on his arm. "Your scent," she said simply. "Not hidden." Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. He didn't have time to process her words. The humming grew louder, the room's glow dimming as the red symbol pulsed faster. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. The woman looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she extended her hand. "Trust me," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "I will protect." For a moment, Ethan hesitated. But as the distant growls grew louder, echoing through the walls like a nightmare closing in, he reached out and took her hand. And together, they ran. The milk's secret. Ethan sat on the floor of the glowing chamber, staring at his hands. They didn't look any different, calloused from years of work, dirt still clinging under his nails. But they felt different, stronger. His exhaustion had vanished, replaced by a strange, buzzing energy that coursed through his veins. It wasn't adrenaline. He knew that feeling all too well. This was something else entirely. The silver-skinned alien woman, Nira, stood nearby, her back to him as she worked on some device embedded in the wall. Sparks of light flickered around her fingers as she manipulated the alien controls with precision. Ethan couldn't shake the thought that she was more than just a nurse. Her movements were too deliberate, too confident, like someone who'd seen more battles than surgeries. "What was in that milk?" Ethan finally asked, his voice breaking the tense silence. Nira paused, glancing over her shoulder. Her large black eyes studied him for a moment, unreadable. Then she turned fully, holding up a small vial of the same glowing liquid. "Restoration," she said simply. "Made from plant. Very rare." "Rare?" Ethan asked, narrowing his eyes. "So what, you're just handing it out to random humans? What's the catch?" She tilted her head, her expression faintly amused. "No catch. You were dying. This saves." Ethan stood, the buzzing in his muscles making him feel restless. "Yeah, it saved me, but it's doing something else, isn't it? I feel different." Nira's gaze lingered on him, and for a moment she hesitated. Then, with a sigh, she placed the vial on a floating shelf and walked closer. "Your kind. Unique," she said, her voice softer now. "Human body. Adapts fast. Milk changes you." "Changes me how?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising. "Am I some kind of experiment to you?" Her expression hardened, and for the first time, Ethan saw something sharp in her eyes. "You alive. That is all," she said firmly. "Experiment. No. Survival. Yes." Ethan clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He didn't want to admit it, but she was right. He was alive because of her, whatever was happening to him. It was better than dying alone in that cursed forest. Still, her words nagged at him. Changes you. What did that mean? Look, he said, his tone softer. I just need to know what's happening to me. I'm not used to glowing liquids and alien tech. Is this going to hurt me? Nara's expression softened slightly, and she gestured for him to sit. Reluctantly, he complied. She crouched beside him, her movements fluid and precise, and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was cool, almost soothing. Milk, she began, choosing her words carefully, heals fast. Your cells. Repair better. Stronger. But side effects. Side effects. Ethan repeated, his stomach sinking. What kind of side effects? She hesitated again, her fingers tapping lightly against her device, as though searching for the right explanation. Mind. Sharper. Body. Faster. But unstable. Unstable. Ethan's voice rose. What does that mean? Am I going to fall apart or something? Nira shook her head quickly. No, not fall. But risk. Milk not, for humans. Effects. Unknown. Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Great. He'd survived a crash, escaped predators, and now he was a guinea pig for some alien miracle drug. So you don't even know what it'll do to me, he muttered. Nira frowned, her expression almost hurt. I save you, she said quietly. I not let you die. Ethan looked at her, guilt prickling at the edges of his frustration. She wasn't wrong. She'd risked her life to help him, and he was still alive because of her. Whatever was happening to him, he owed her that much. Okay, he said after a long pause. But if this stuff starts turning me into some kind of alien monster, I'm blaming you. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Human humor, she said, her tone lightening. Strange. Before Ethan could respond, the room's soft hum grew louder, and the glowing walls dimmed. Nara's expression shifted immediately, her sharp eyes scanning the symbols that appeared on her device. What now? Ethan asked, standing. Trouble, she said, her voice clipped. Predators. Close. Ethan's chest tightened. You mean the ones from the forest? Nira nodded, already moving toward a concealed panel in the wall. She pressed her hand against it, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing an array of sleek, unfamiliar tools. She grabbed something that looked like a weapon, a long silver staff with glowing runes etched into its surface, and tossed it to him. Wait, what am I supposed to do with this? Ethan asked, fumbling to catch it. Defend, she said simply, grabbing a similar weapon for herself. Milk makes you stronger. Time to prove. Ethan stared at her, a mix of fear and determination bubbling inside him. You're kidding, right? But Nira wasn't kidding. She moved to the chamber's entrance, her weapon at the ready, and glanced back at him. Come, human, she said, her voice steady. We fight. And with that, the door slid open, revealing the dense, glowing forest beyond, and the faint, menacing growls of something waiting in the shadows. The alien threat. The hum of the chamber's walls was suddenly drowned out by a chilling growl that reverberated through the air, sending shivers down Ethan's spine. He froze mid-step, gripping the strange weapon Nira had thrust into his hands earlier. The glowing symbols etched into its surface pulsed faintly, but he had no idea how to use it, or even if he could. Nira's sharp black eyes darted to him. Move, she said, her voice low and urgent. They come. Who's they? Ethan whispered, his throat dry. He could still taste the strange milk she'd given him, its effects humming in his veins. Predators, sure, but what are we talking about? Wolves? Bears? Giant? Bugs? Nira didn't answer right away. Instead, she pressed her palm against the chamber's translucent wall, and a holographic display flickered to life. The screen showed a series of heat signatures, several of them, moving quickly through the forest toward their location. Not bugs, she said finally, her tone clipped. Hunters. Ethan's heart sank. Great, just great. The chamber shuddered as something heavy slammed against its outer wall. Ethan stumbled, clutching the staff tightly as his eyes darted toward the source of the sound. A low, guttural snarl followed, growing louder and more menacing. Whatever was out there wasn't just hunting. It was hungry. Nera turned to him, her expression fierce. "Follow me," she said, gesturing toward a narrow passage that had opened in the back of the chamber. "We escape." "Escape to where?" Ethan asked, his voice rising with panic. "We're in the middle of a forest on an alien planet." Her gaze hardened. "You trust me, or die. Your choice." Ethan hesitated only for a second before nodding. "Fine. Lead the way." The two of them moved quickly through the passage, the dim, bioluminescent walls casting eerie shadows. Behind them, the sounds of the predators grew louder. Growls, snarls, and the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the chamber's exterior. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as they emerged into the open air, the alien forest stretching out before them. Nera paused, scanning the surroundings with the sleek device on her wrist. "This way," she said, pointing toward a dense cluster of trees. "Fast." They ran, the ground beneath their feet soft and springy like some kind of alien moss. Ethan's enhanced body felt lighter, faster, and stronger than ever before, but his mind was still reeling. He barely had time to process what was happening before being thrust into yet another life-or-death situation. "What are these things?" he asked as they sprinted through the forest. "Why are they after us?" "They smell you," Nera replied without breaking stride. "Injured. Weak. To them. Prey." Ethan cursed under his breath. "Fantastic. So I'm just a walking buffet." "Not just you," she said, her tone dark. "Me too. They adapt. Smart." That word sent a fresh wave of fear through Ethan. It was one thing to outrun mindless beasts, but intelligent predators. He wasn't sure he was ready for that. The growls were closer now, echoing through the trees. Ethan glanced over his shoulder and caught a glimpse of movement, shadowy figures darting between the glowing trunks, their sleek forms barely visible in the dim light. He couldn't make out their exact shape, but their speed and coordination were unmistakable. These weren't ordinary animals. Nera suddenly stopped and raised her staff, its glowing runes flaring to life. Ethan skidded to a halt beside her, his chest heaving. "Why are we stopping?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. "No choice," she said. "Too close. We fight." Ethan's grip on his weapon tightened. "I don't even know how to use this thing." Nera shot him a sharp look. "You feel it. Milk makes you stronger, faster. Trust your body." "That's easy for you to say," he muttered, but he had no time to argue. The first predator emerged from the shadows, its sleek, scaled body glinting in the bioluminescent light. It was massive, easily the size of a bear, with 4 powerful legs and a pair of glowing yellow eyes that locked onto Ethan like a target. Ethan's breath hitched. "What the hell is that?" "Hunter," Nera said simply. "Do not let it bite." "Noted," Ethan said, gripping the staff like a baseball bat. The creature lunged, its jaws snapping with terrifying speed. Ethan barely had time to react, but his enhanced reflexes kicked in. He swung the staff wildly, and to his surprise, the weapon discharged a pulse of energy that sent the predator reeling backward with a yelp. Ethan stared at the staff in shock. "Did I just focus?" Nera barked, raising her own weapon. She fired a controlled burst of energy at a second predator that had appeared, sending it skittering back into the shadows. "More come." Ethan gritted his teeth and adjusted his grip on the staff. The buzzing energy in his veins felt stronger now, almost like it was guiding him. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves as another predator emerged, snarling and baring its razor-sharp teeth. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like prey. A new bond. Ethan leaned against a twisted, glowing tree, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The forest around him was eerily quiet now, the predators temporarily driven back. His hands still tingled from the energy bursts he'd unleashed with the alien staff, and the faint hum of its power echoed in his mind. "You did well," Nira said, her voice cutting through the silence. She stood a few feet away, her silver skin glinting faintly under the alien moonlight. There wasn't a single scratch on her, her movements precise and controlled throughout the fight. Ethan, on the other hand, felt like he'd been hit by a freight train. "Well, I barely survived," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're out there moving like some kind of warrior, and I'm swinging this thing around like a caveman." Nira tilted her head, studying him. "Human instincts, strong. You adapt fast." Ethan scoffed. "Yeah, well, I don't feel very adapted right now." He slid down to the ground, exhaustion finally catching up to him. The warmth of the mossy terrain was almost comforting, even though every muscle in his body ached. Nira crouched beside him, her large black eyes searching his face. "You survive," she said softly. "That is enough." Her tone carried a quiet conviction that made Ethan pause. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. There was something more to her than the calm, clinical demeanor she'd shown before. She wasn't just saving him out of duty. There was genuine care in her actions, a determination that went beyond the mere act of survival. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why are you doing this? You could have left me in that forest. Your people probably wouldn't care if I lived or died." Nira's gaze shifted, and for a moment she seemed almost vulnerable. "My people do not understand humans," she said quietly. "They see weakness. I see potential." "Potential?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of potential are we talking about?" She hesitated, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the staff she held. "You fight, even when odds are impossible. You learn, even when pain comes. Humans do not stop." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, we don't have a lot of options when survival's on the line." Nira shook her head. "It is more. You hope, even now." She gestured to the forest around them. "You see death, and still think of life." Ethan frowned, unsure how to respond. The weight of her words settled over him, and he realized she wasn't just talking about the fight or the predators. She was talking about something deeper, something that resonated with him in a way he hadn't expected. "Is that why you saved me?" he asked softly. Nira nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes, and because no one should die alone." The simplicity of her answer hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, the alien forest around them faded away, and all he could see was her, a stranger who had risked everything to save someone she didn't even know. "Thanks," he said finally, the word feeling inadequate but genuine. She tilted her head, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. Human words, strange, but good. A low rumble in the distance broke the moment, and both of them tensed. Ethan's hand instinctively tightened around his staff as he scanned the shadows for movement. "They're still out there, aren't they?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. Nira nodded. "Yes, always. But..." She stood and offered him her hand. "We moved together. Stronger." Ethan hesitated only for a second before taking her hand. Her grip was firm, her cool touch grounding him. As she pulled him to his feet, he felt a spark of something new. A connection, a sense of trust that he hadn't felt in years. "All right," he said, adjusting his grip on the staff. "Let's do this your way." Nara's eyes glinted in the moonlight, her expression resolute. Together, human. And with that, they disappeared into the forest, their bond growing stronger with every step. The predators might still be out there, lurking in the shadows, but for the first time, Ethan didn't feel alone. The final stand. The cliff loomed before them, its jagged edges sharp against the glow of the twin moons. Ethan skidded to a halt, his heart pounding as he looked over the precipice. Below, an endless expanse of dark, swirling mist obscured the ground. It was a sheer drop with no visible path down. Behind him, the growls of the predators grew louder, the ground trembling under their relentless pursuit. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We ran all this way just to get cornered." Nira stood beside him, her chest rising and falling with measured breaths. She held her staff at the ready, its glowing runes casting an otherworldly light on her silver skin. "Not cornered," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "We fight." Ethan glanced back toward the forest, where the shadows shifted and rustled with movement. The predators were closing in, their yellow eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. There were more of them now, at least a dozen. Each one moved with predatory grace, their sleek, scaled bodies blending seamlessly with the alien foliage. "This is suicide," Ethan muttered, gripping his staff tightly. The buzzing energy in his veins surged, as if urging him to stand his ground. "They'll tear us apart." Nera turned to him, her black eyes steady and unwavering. "No, you are stronger now. Faster. Trust the milk. Trust yourself." Ethan shook his head, his pulse racing. "I'm not a fighter. I'm just a guy trying to survive." Her gaze softened for a moment, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. "Survival is fight," she said simply. Then, without warning, she stepped forward, raising her staff. "Together, we win." The predators burst from the tree line, their snarls echoing across the cliffside. Ethan barely had time to react before the first one lunged at him, its jaws snapping inches from his face. He swung his staff instinctively, the weapon discharging a pulse of energy that sent the creature sprawling. The force of the blow surprised even him. "Whoa," he muttered, staring at the staff. "Okay, maybe I can work with this." Another predator charge, and this time, Ethan was ready. He sidestepped its attack with newfound agility, bringing the staff down hard on its flank. The weapon crackled with energy, and the predator let out a pained yelp before retreating. Beside him, Nira moved with practiced precision, her movements fluid and deadly. She dispatched two predators in quick succession, her staff emitting sharp bursts of light that sent the creatures scattering. Her expression remained calm, her focus unshaken. "Ethan," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Behind you." He spun just in time to see a predator lunging at him from the side. Without thinking, he thrust his staff forward, and a surge of energy erupted from the weapon, slamming into the creature and sending it hurtling backward. The adrenaline coursing through him was almost intoxicating. For a brief moment, he caught Nera's gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. A sense of trust, of partnership that hadn't been there before. But the predators weren't finished. They regrouped, circling the pair with eerie coordination. Their growls harmonized into a low, menacing rumble that made the ground vibrate. Ethan tightened his grip on the staff, his knuckles white. "They're not giving up." "Good," Nera said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "We don't either." The largest predator stepped forward, its glowing eyes fixed on Ethan. It let out a bone-chilling roar, and the others followed suit, their snarls rising into a cacophony of sound. Ethan's stomach churned, but the buzzing energy inside him grew stronger, pushing back his fear. "Ethan," Nera said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "This is your moment. Show them what human means." Ethan glanced at her, his mind racing. He didn't know what she saw in him, why she believed he was capable of this, but her confidence was infectious. He took a deep breath, his grip steadying on the staff. As the largest predator charged, Ethan stepped forward to meet it. The world seemed to slow as he focused, every movement deliberate and precise. The staff hummed with power as he swung it, connecting with the creature's side and sending a burst of energy rippling through its body. The predator let out a deafening roar before collapsing, its form twitching as the energy coursed through it. The remaining predators hesitated, their glowing eyes darting between Ethan and Nira. For the first time, they seemed uncertain. "Go," Nira said, her voice firm. "This fight, not for them." One by one, the predators retreated, their forms melting back into the shadows. The forest fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of Ethan and Nira. Ethan lowered his staff, his arms trembling. "We did it," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "We actually did it." Nira placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression both proud and serious. "You did it," she said. "Milk helped, but strength was yours." Ethan met her gaze, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Thanks," he said simply. She nodded, then turned toward the cliff's edge, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Come," she said. "More to do. But tonight, you survive." And for the first time since crashing on this alien world, Ethan felt like he could do more than just survive. A new beginning. The first rays of the twin suns painted the alien sky in streaks of gold and crimson, their light breaking through the dense forest canopy. Ethan leaned against a jagged rock at the edge of the cliff, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. The predators were gone, their snarls and glowing eyes now just a memory. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos of the battle just hours before. Nira stood a few feet away, her silver skin gleaming in the dawn light. She stared out over the cliff's edge, her staff still glowing faintly in her hand. Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, even though her face remained calm. She had saved his life. Again. But there was something about her demeanor that made him wonder if she had truly found the peace she sought. "So, now what?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse but steady. The alien milk coursing through his veins still buzzed faintly, a reminder of the changes happening inside him. "Do we just keep running?" Nira turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the sunlight like pools of ink. For a moment, she didn't speak, as if weighing her words carefully. Then, she stepped closer, her staff deactivating with a soft hum. "No more running," she said simply. "You are ready." Ethan frowned, pushing himself off the rock. "Ready for what? I barely survived that fight. And this," he gestured to the glowing patch on his arm. "Whatever this is, it's not permanent, right? What happens when it wears off?" Nira tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "Milk changed you," she said. "Stronger, faster, but not just body. Mind too." "Mind?" Ethan echoed, narrowing his eyes. "What do you mean?" She reached into a small compartment on her belt and pulled out a circular device, no larger than a coin. It flickered to life, projecting a hologram of a star map. Ethan recognized Earth among the glowing constellations, its blue-green surface a stark contrast to the surrounding alien worlds. "You are different," Nira said, pointing to Earth on the map. "Humans adapt, evolve faster than any species I know. Milk showed me potential." Ethan stared at the map, his jaw tightening. "You're saying this wasn't just about saving my life, was it?" Her gaze didn't waver. "You are alive because I believed in you. But now, you must believe too. Your kind can do more than survive. You can lead." Ethan's mind raced. The weight of her words pressed down on him like gravity, and he felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. He had spent so long thinking of himself as just another person, another speck in the vastness of the universe. But here, on this alien world, with this alien nurse standing before him, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Purpose. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Nira stepped closer, placing the device in his hand. "My people fear humans," she said. "They see you as threat. But I see hope. You will help me show them." Ethan laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You want me to waltz into your world and convince them humans aren't dangerous. After everything we just went through. Nera's expression softened, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. You already proved it, she said. Not with words, with action. You fought. Not for yourself, but for us. For survival. That is strength. They will see. Ethan looked down at the holographic map, his fingers tracing the glowing constellations. He didn't know what the future held, or if he was even capable of doing what Nera asked. But he couldn't deny the fire that had been lit inside him. The same fire that had kept him alive, that had pushed him to fight when everything seemed lost. All right, he said finally, his voice steady. I'll do it. But not just for your people, for mine too. If there's a chance to make something better, I'll take it. Nera nodded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes shining with something Ethan couldn't quite place. Hope, perhaps, or maybe relief. Then we begin, she said. She extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Ethan took it. Together, they turned toward the horizon, where the forest stretched endlessly beneath the rising suns. It wouldn't be easy, Ethan knew that much. But for the first time since crashing on this alien planet, he felt like he had a purpose, a reason to keep going. As they began their journey, Ethan glanced at Nera. You know, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You're not like any nurse I've ever met. Nera raised an eyebrow, her tone laced with amusement. And you, not like any patient. The laughter that followed was brief, but it lingered in the air as they walked, a small spark of light in the vast unknown.